So I had this idea for a wall-mounted sign based off these drop ceiling light diffusers that are sold at Home Depot. They're not particularly cheap, coming in at just over $40 each, but they're readily available, somewhat flexible, and already perfect for light diffusion. I'm going to start by building a frame out of MDF. The material is 3/4 of an inch thick and ripped down to somewhere between 3 and 4 inches. I then cut out a groove for the diffuser to sit in, which thankfully just takes one pass on the table saw. I then started gluing the frame together, making sure to align everything as close to perfect as I can get it, and then gave it a few hours to dry. Once I was done, I gave it a quick sanding and began the process of reinforcing the joints. To do this, I started by pre-drilling 2 holes, using a countersink bit for the screw heads, and then driving in 2 screws that I put a little bit of wood glue on, just for some extra strength. I used 2 screws on each corner, and if I made the frame out of wood, I would have used miter joints and just wood glue. That would have held it just fine. Once I was done, I took it inside and started to add in some drywall compound to smooth out the holes and imperfections. Bondo is great for this as well, but this is what I had. After letting dry for a couple of hours, I took it back outside for another round of sanding. I then used a 45-degree chamfer bit on my handheld router to knock off the edges of the frame. I'll explain more on my style choice here later on, but for now, I'm moving on to masking in prep for paint. I found that drywall PVA primer and sealer works fantastic on MDF because of its sponge-like texture. If you've ever struggled to spray paint MDF, you'll know exactly what I'm talking about. Regular latex house paint works great too. Next, I'm going to drive in a few of these furniture tacks as a subtle style additive. My vision for this sign is to essentially make it look like an industrial metal frame that was put together with bolts and rivets, sort of like what you see on ships. I should have also sanded these a little bit so the paint sticks better, but the primer seemed to hold just fine. Using a paint roller helps tremendously to smooth out the texture left from brushing as well. This part I'm really excited about. I'm using an oxidizing iron paint that will actually rust, giving you the ability to fake metal surfaces. This stuff is very runny, so I didn't bother trying to use a roller. It usually just smears runny paint around without actually rolling it on evenly. I also layered this up pretty heavy, doing around 4 to 5 coats in some areas. I did this so the rust can feel textured and look more authentic, and also give it a little bit of depth. After it was dry, I sanded just enough to hide the brush marks and took it back inside for masking. I'm doing it in this order because rust never appears on top of paint. It's always the paint that falls off that causes the rust. So I'm masking off the oxidized paint before my final color coat. The trick is to rip up the masking tape to make it look like a natural edge where the rust is starting to take over. For the final color coat, I went with Rust-Oleum's hammered line of paint because it gives it an almost metallic paint job without the need of a clear coat or polishing. It looks a little brown in this clip, but it is a dark gray. Once that dried, I was free to remove the masking tape that covered the oxidizing paint, along with the diffuser. If you run a blade down the edge where the tape meets the paint, it will give it a much better tear off and keep you from accidentally removing any paint. To help speed up the rusting process, I'm mixing up a bit of salt, vinegar, and hydrogen peroxide. Quantities don't really matter here, but I went with around 1 cup of peroxide, 1 cup of vinegar, and about a tablespoon of salt. And then warm water, or hot water, just not boiling. Unfortunately, this did clog my sprayer, so I had to hold it upside down without the mister. But you can see just how quickly this works. It started to oxidize the metal almost immediately. Once the mixture concoction dried, I brought it back to my table, shook off some of the salt that was left over, and started installing the interior components. I'm using offcuts of the same MDF material to create interior braces and a place to mount the sign to the wall. Since it's pretty wide, I'm going to use 3 pillars, all evenly spaced apart. I'm using the keyhole bit here on my CNC to carve out a space where the screw heads can attach to the sign from the wall. There's a ton of ways you can do this. you don't need any special tools like this. One of the most common ways would just be to drive in very long screws into the wall and leave them protruding like maybe an inch, and then just rest the sign, like the top frame of the sign, on those screws, and that would work just fine. Another way is the wire that is usually found on the back of picture frames. But for something like this, this is at least my preferred way of doing it. Another tip here is to mount the supports at an exact increment apart. That's easy to remember and easy to measure. For me, I spaced the mounting holes exactly 24 inches apart. So when I go to hang this, I know the screws will need to be just that, exactly 24 inches apart. Using just glue and clamping is enough for these as well. They don't need to be screwed in. Now on to the lighting. I'll have links in the description for all of this stuff, but the ones that I went with are perfect length for the inside of this. The only issue being there is just barely enough room for the wire. I'm gonna cut a little relief hole so that it's not like a really harsh bend in the wire. If you wanted to, you can have the wire come out the side, and that would alleviate it as well, but I wanted to have this just come out the bottom, right where it's at. So it's not going to go the whole way through for mine. Now on to the design, and I wanted this to look vintage, of course, but also reflect the hand-painted aspect of how it will ultimately appear. So nothing too complicated. This is for a small breakfast nook in an office space called the Metro Cafe. So besides lettering, I also wanted to include this neat little coffee cup character. Just give it some life. I'll link in the description below where I found this illustration along with the fonts. Next up, it's time to hang the sign so I can trace the image onto the diffuser. I have this cheap little projector that will guide me in my tracing. This is where it pays to have a simplistic design, because if you think tracing takes a while, it's nothing compared to filling in the lines with paint later on. If you have access to a large vinyl cutter, you can also just cut the design and stick it on, but I'm going for a more genuine hand-painted look, just like how they used to do it. I'm using off-the-shelf latex house paint in a dark gray. I would have preferred black, but I already had this on hand, so it'll do. After the first coat, I'll turn the sign on so I can see where I need to fill in with more paint. You should only need about 1 to 2 layers. I also added a border with some help of a bit of masking tape. Once that's done, I can begin to erase any leftover pencil marks from the tracing process. And last but not least, I'll carve away a small relief channel for the wire to run. And just like that, this sign is done. Thank you guys so much for watching. If you have any questions at all, let me know in the comments. And if you liked this video, I would truly appreciate it if you liked, commented, subscribed, hit the bell icon, the whole 9 yards, because my channel could really use the help. The algorithm has not been kind lately, and all of those things go a long way to help boost the channel. So thank you again so much, and I will see you in the next episode.